Excuse me, we're gonna get started in a minute. Did anybody come in and not sign in over here? If you can lift your hand up, I'll come to you. Okay, what's your name? You got a pen? Anybody else? Don't let Christina be alone. Come on. Sure. All right. Just so she's not by herself. You took one for the team. It wasn't your fault, nobody. So, anybody else? All right, carry on.
Probably. So we may just see.
I live.
2001.
Christina, Sarah need to sign in.
But the ones who didn't run.
Oh, it's the evening too, right from sure. Yeah, I should try.
No, not something right here. I don't want
Oh, sorry.
All right. Y'all ready to get started? I don't have as deep of a voice as Britt, but hopefully can bring us in. Oh, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm DK Wesley, Assistant County Manager. I serve in the capacity also as the Justice Resource Advisory Council Chair. Would like to welcome you to this very, very important meeting where we're going to talk about women, right? The salt of the earth, very important topic. We're going to talk about women that have been in contact and involved with our justice system tonight. In this county, we desire for all people to have equitable access to resources and services and live a vibrant and thriving life. I want to start by acknowledging our Sheriff Quentin Miller. He's not here tonight, but his leadership and being transparent and allowing folks to enter into the jail and have conversation is why we're here today. So I want to give him some acknowledgement. Buncombe County has been a recipient of the MacArthur Foundation's Safety and Justice Challenge since 2018. We've used those dollars from the foundation to increase equity and improve resources for our justice-involved folks here in Buncombe County. Through this project, our technical assistant providers, Vera Institute of Justice, conducted a study on justice-involved women in Buncombe County. We continue to welcome the research and insight into the growth in the number of women in our local jail. We acknowledge that there are ways we can improve. There are ways that we can and we must improve how we serve the women in our jurisdiction. I'm very excited to welcome our partners at the Vera Institute to share more about their study and their findings, and look forward to working with the local agencies and service providers to address recommendations set forth in this report. We also tonight want to welcome University of North Carolina Collaborative for Maternal and Infant Health, who will share information on the Dignity for Women Who Are Incarcerated Act and related resources that their team has developed. Again, we're so excited for this opportunity for information sharing. So welcome to those in the room. There's a huge showing here. It's exciting. And also those that are joining us on the web. We look forward to the collaboration and the discussion as we look for opportunities to work around and among our local agencies and service providers to address improving the experience for justice-involved women in Buncombe County. I'll turn it over to Vera now.
Cool. Thank you, DK. Okay, let's get started here. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. As DK welcomed us so kindly, my name is Vera Donrose-Roden. I'm a Senior Program Associate at the Vera Institute of Justice. And this is my colleague, Jen. Hi. Jen's a Senior Research Associate with the Vera Institute of Justice. So we're really excited to be here tonight chatting with all of you about some of our recent work. For those of you who don't know, the Vera Institute of Justice is a national nonprofit. We provide research and work with impacted communities and government leaders. We aim to see less people incarcerated and then dignity for those who are behind bars. As DK mentioned, we are working with Buncombe County through the MacArthur Foundation Safety and Justice Challenge. This challenge aims to also reduce jail incarceration and increase equity for all. Through this challenge, we started working with Buncombe County in 2018. And then since 2020, we started working on a specific women's project. So tonight we're going to share findings from our recently published report. We have copies of the full report and the fact sheet on the table over there. And then for those joining us online, you can access the report at the following link. We'll kick off the presentation talking generally about women's incarceration to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then we're going to talk about our study, what it entailed, our findings, and then highlight some of the recommendations. So, all right. After that, we'll hand it over to UNC, and then we'll have discussion at the end. So please hold your questions as they come up. You can write them down, and we'll have some time at the end. So before jumping in, it's important we understand who and what we're talking about tonight. So as you can see on these charts, the nearly 2 million people who are locked up in the United States fall into several categories. So we have state and federal prisons where people are convicted and serving sentences usually of a year or longer. Then we have county jails that make up a third of the total population. They detain people locally. Most are held pretrial detention, which means they've been charged and are presumed innocent as they have not gone through a plea or a trial yet. Usually they are in pretrial detention because they had a bond set that they were unable to pay. A portion of people are also in jail because they were on pretrial supervision or probation and were unable to comply with the conditions set forth, and their probation or pretrial officer or judge said that they couldn't comply and then as a penalty put them back into jail. Jails also hold people from other counties, federal agencies, and DOC, State Department of Corrections. In addition to the pretrial population in Buncombe County, there's also folks that are sentenced to DUIs or misdemeanors. So nationally, we see the jail population and prison populations. Sorry, I need to get myself situated here. Okay, so nationally, we're seeing jail and prison populations increasing dramatically from the 1970s through the 2000s. They then started to level off, but remained some of the highest populations in the world when measured per capita. Here we see the trends for the US, highlighting that rural and small to mid-sized metro counties, of which Buncombe County is one, have higher rates than bigger cities and counties. The Buncombe County Jail, which is run by your locally elected sheriff, Quentin Miller, as DK mentioned earlier, as you can see on the left side of the screen, the number of people in the Buncombe Jail from 1970 to 2021 as it's increased, and then included a drop off in early 2020 with the pandemic. Who goes in the jail and how long they stay, though, is due to a range of decisions by different agencies and people, including police, judges or magistrates, prosecutors, defense, probation. No one person or agency is responsible for the size of the jail, but it is the county government's responsibility to understand who's in jail, track trends, and respond accordingly so that folks are not incarcerated that shouldn't be. So one thing you'll hear us talking about today throughout the presentation is average daily population, ADP, or jail admissions. Admissions refer to people who are booked into the jail, while ADP refers to the number of people held in jail on average. So ADP is based on bed occupancy, so that's the number of people that are staying overnight. And bookings are people who come in and then leave within a few hours. So for example, in this slide, you can see that that the ADP for women has ranged from 30 to 70, but in 2019 alone, there were 3,200 individual bookings of women. So there's a difference between men and women's jail incarceration that we want to highlight tonight and talk about. The number of women incarcerated nationally across the country is growing at a faster rate than any other population under correctional custody or supervision. Since 1970, the number of women in jail nationwide has increased 14-fold, from under 8,000 to nearly 110,000. Women are now held in almost every county in the US, whereas before in 1970s, 3/4 didn't hold a single woman in jail. Specifically in Buncombe County, as you can see on the chart on the right, the women's population has fluctuated since 2017, with then a sharp drop at the beginning of 2020, coinciding with the pandemic. The average daily population of women in the jail from January 2017 through April 2021 ranged from about 55 to 75 women. Beginning in 2020, coinciding with the pandemic, we saw the ADP drop, averaging about 41 women in the jail at that time, or 11% of the jail population. However, since then, the women's population has increased and has been in the 70s in recent months. As of November 27th, utilizing Buncombe's jail dashboard, we saw that the jail was detaining 420 people, of whom 69 were women, or 16.4% of that total population. Out of those 69 women, 63 or 91% were in pretrial detention. So this puts the jail at around 85% capacity, which is high. And that makes this conversation all the more urgent tonight. How can we reduce that population and ensure that women are being served in the community? So I'm going to briefly touch on what our project entailed, and then we'll jump into some of the findings. So, like I said, we started at the beginning of the pandemic in March towards the summer of 2020. And a lot of our findings were impacted by the pandemic, and we'll discuss that throughout our presentation. So we started in 2020. We had conversations with county stakeholders and community service providers. County stakeholders included law enforcement, pretrial, court staff, district attorney staff, public defender's office staff, folks at the jail, reentry staff, community supervision, and the Family Justice Center. On the community service provider side, we spoke with Sunrise, Project Cara, Homeless Services, the Women's Recovery Center, and RHA Health Services. We asked questions about strengths and weaknesses around services for justice-involved women in Buncombe County. In addition to that, we analyzed administrative jail data, meaning data from the internal jail database on bookings, demographics, and releases from January 2017 through April 2021. We spoke with the women virtually in September of 2021. We spoke with 40 women, which was almost all women that were incarcerated at that time via Zoom, and then interviewed 20 of those women to learn more. We continue to meet and share our findings with the Sheriff's Office and county stakeholders. And then our report was released on November 16th, 2022. So we are excited to continue to work with Buncombe County through the MacArthur Foundation Safety and Justice Challenge as the county decides or chooses to implement the recommendations that are set forth in the report. And before I turn it over to Jen, just one last thing I want to share is that our findings are responsive to the women that we spoke with and to the data that we reviewed. But if implemented, the recommendations in this report could impact the jail for all people. And that's a really important point that we'd like to highlight there. So I'll pass it over to Jen to share some of our findings.
Okay, so thank you. I just want to also give a shout out to the staff at the jail who facilitated the work by video interviews a year ago. It was a big logistical undertaking, and this wouldn't have been possible without that cooperation. So this slide here just shows a few highlighting a few key points about information from when we say administrative data, we mean the overall jail records from the 4-year period. So first of all, Black women are overrepresented in the jail, making up about 14% of the women incarcerated compared to about 6% of the general population of women in the county. Secondly, many admissions in the jail for women were for lower level charges. Common charges included misdemeanor larceny, driving with a suspended license, drug possession or paraphernalia possession, and some charges were more serious like DUI. The average length of stay for a woman on pretrial supervision release over this period was 19 days, and on a felony probation violation was 20 days. Almost all of the women detained at the time in our survey, as we'll get into, reported some history of substance dependency. Many told us that substance use was part of the reason that they were cycling in and out of contact with the legal system. And another point that we found is that money bail is gradually being set at higher amounts and more frequently. So looking at the survey that we did, which again was with the 40 women, which was almost all of whom under local jurisdiction at the time in the jail in September of 2021. Of those 40, all but one reported having had a substance dependency. 3 out of 4 were parents of children. More than 2/3 said that they have been diagnosed with a mental illness by a medical provider. More than 9 out of 10 had experienced at least one form of victimization, including being a victim of crime or of abuse. 4 out of 10 reported being homeless prior to admission to the jail. Nearly half said that they were unemployed before admission to the jail, and about 1 in 3 reported having been in the jail 7 or more times over her lifetime. And again, these are patterns that we see across the country. This is not unique to this county, but just to underscore that this is a population of people who have a lot of struggles in their lives. So we're going to cover 6 themes tonight, showing a few key points. Not all of the information is in the presentation. You can read more in the report, but basically the themes that emerged from the report are the criminalization of poverty generally, the use of money bail, the patterns related to community supervision, probation, parole, and pretrial, substance use issues, jail conditions and costs, and interagency coordination and communication. And again, there'll be a chance for questions at the end of the presentation, but please make notes as you're going through. And if you have just a clarification question as I'm talking, you can feel free to just vocalize that. So first of all, on the criminalization of poverty, the big theme here in amidst the numbers and the graphs is that according to the participants in this study, poverty and homelessness are at the root of people's initial exposure to the criminal legal system. And then after entering the system, fines and fees tend to pile up. People have their employment and their housing disrupted because of detention. And then a cycle of poverty, criminalization, and incarceration starts to compound. So this table shows the top charges with the highest number of admissions in 2020. So we do see some more serious charges like assault and DUI, but many of the charges here are lower level offenses that are related to homelessness and poverty, including misdemeanor larceny, simple drug possession, trespassing, and driving with a suspended license. These charges also have longer lengths of stay. And so we see here, for example, that the average length of stay for misdemeanor larceny and paraphernalia possession is 2 days, and the average length of stay for possession of methamphetamine is 8 days. And then looking at the qualitative information that we heard in surveys and interviews, we repeatedly heard from the women that we spoke with that the parts of pretrial supervision and probation supervision that they found most difficult to meet were related to the basic reality of not having very much money. So we heard people were facing violations of their supervision because they didn't have stable housing at the time that their officer needed to check in. They were unable to access transportation, to make appointments at certain times, struggled with curfews at certain times of the evening, which made it difficult to hold down jobs with evening shifts. And generally, we're having to face choices of paying for basic needs for their family versus paying for costs related to complying with supervision conditions. We also heard quite a bit about people's perception that police in the county or people feel that they are giving disproportionate attention to communities and groups of people where poverty and homelessness are more prevalent. So for example, one participant said on this topic, they, referring to the police, are in the projects a lot. It's not necessarily the projects where the drugs are, you know, that's everywhere, but I think they pick at that more. They used to stop you if you have a backpack walking through, they'll stop you and search you, and that's not right. I'm not going to read every quote, but some of these are also in the report. So the recommendations that the report contains related to the criminalization of poverty are these 5 listed on the left. For the sake of time, we're just going to focus on the second one that is in red, but we have some more details in the materials. So the second one says, provide alternatives to arrest and or jail for certain charges, especially things like trespassing, low-level drug possession, and other things related to public order. So as we know, too often jails become the local default institution that people encounter in a crisis. And jails are neither meant to solve these situations, nor do they have the resources or capacity to resolve complex social issues. What is needed instead is supportive healing services that attempt to address the underlying challenges that people have without using punishment or confinement as the primary response. This is especially important for women. It's important for everybody, but as we saw at the beginning of the presentation, women who are in the Buncombe jail have various and multiple compounded forms of trauma, victimization, and criminalization. And so this is especially urgent. Other possible responses include expanding pre-arrest diversion triage centers, alternatives to 911 response for people experiencing mental health crises, and ensuring that these are available on short notice and around the clock. Because one of the reasons that people end up with initial police and jail contact is that in many communities is the most available, responsive service on a 24/7 basis. And there can be alternatives, but they need to be able to respond in the same way. This, of course, requires coordination across systems with multiple agencies in the county. Another point is that police leadership locally or local leaders in government in cooperation with police can make choices about how to deploy the resources of law enforcement and can choose to focus resources of policing on more serious situations rather than on situations that are related to people living in public spaces or dealing with substance use. So there can be directives in the county, for example, not to enforce drug possession laws through arrest, and instead to refer people to local services. Finally, the county government has the option, and you as its constituents can participate in this, to change local ordinances that may make it illegal to do things like sleeping in public spaces, that people end up in that situation when they are struggling with poverty. So moving to the next topic, we're going to talk about bail. Just to review the basics, some people in this room might know this already, but just to get us all on the same page, bail refers to a component of pretrial release. So in the pretrial stage, a person can be released with different conditions. These conditions can be financial or non-financial. And these are generally designed to try to overcome the risks that the person might not appear at their next hearing, or that the person might cause harm to themselves or to the public during their release. So we're going to talk here about the financial conditions of release, which we normally call bail or bond, money bail. So a person can also be released with non-financial conditions, which you might have heard of, one of which is obviously you have to appear in court. They can also include attending certain programs, having check-ins, wearing an ankle monitor, etc. In North Carolina, this is called a written promise to appear. So as you can see on this graph, once a person is arrested, charged, and booked into a jail, usually there is a hearing at which a money bail amount may be set. This might happen a couple days after the arrest. So if the judge denies the defendant bail, the person normally stays in the jail until their plea or their trial. This tends to be very rare for more serious charges. If the judge orders a defendant to pay bail as a condition of release, which means that they lose that money if they don't show up at their next hearing, The defendant can either pay it and be in the community until the next stage, or they have to sit in the jail until someone can put up that money for them. And sometimes that doesn't happen. So what this basically means is that people who can pay bail are released, but people who can't remain in jail, even if they are facing the same charges and have a similar assessed risk. So not because people are not sitting in jail under bail because they are a danger to the public necessarily. And one just technical term is that secured bail means that you have to put up some or all of the money up front, whereas unsecured bail means that you don't put up money up front, but you would have to pay that amount if you don't appear at your next hearing or meet other conditions. The last option in this pathway is non-financial release, which means not having to pay money, release back into the community and show up for the next hearing. And then of course, sometimes other conditions around housing or not contacting certain people are included there. So this is supposed to be the most common pathway, that generally the idea is that people are supposed to be released back into the community and that detention in jail is a last resort, but unfortunately detention in jail is a common situation. Research has consistently shown that when a person is detained pre-trial, they generally have worse outcomes in their case in terms of more likely to plead guilty, more likely to be convicted, and more likely to have a longer sentence than a person facing the same charge who was released pre-trial, either with or without financial conditions. Additionally, as I think most people know, pre-trial detention really disrupts people's daily lives in terms of their family, housing, and job situation, as well as these effects on due process and justice. And these effects disproportionately fall on lower income people. So what we learned from the survey that we did a year ago, and I want to acknowledge here that the data that we have from the jail information system on bail is incomplete and imperfect. It was not possible at that time to connect that to specific court data. So some amount of details are missing here, but broadly speaking, we also asked women in the study, the 40 women we talked to, about their bail situation. So the majority of the women that we spoke with had bail set and were unable to pay it. Obviously, we were talking to people who were in the jail. We weren't talking to the women in the community who had been able to pay their bail. So that, of course, does exist too. But of those in the jail at that time, 58% had bail set, and of those, 63% couldn't pay it. 3% of women said that they had been under pretrial supervision. Generally speaking, we see that the average bail amount in the administrative data has been increasing. So we saw that, first of all, that secured bail is being set more often. In 2020, according to the data we had, 64% of bookings had secured bail set compared to 56% of bookings a year prior. And high bail amounts, which, for example, over $10,000 are not necessarily limited to more severe charges. They are also set for bookings with lower level charges like drug possession and stolen property. So there's a few quotes here about people's experiences with bail. Again, I'll just read one. One woman said, I've had a couple times where it's been like literally my bond was $100 and some note bonds, someone has to come up with $100. And in my life, I don't have a lot of people who, most of them are struggling. Most of them don't have $100 to be able to do that. So one point we want to underscore here, especially for people in the room who maybe haven't had the experience of a family member in the justice system, is that it's possible that a court official might think that $100 is a low amount of bail, or a member of the public might think that, but for a lot of people, $100 might as well be $10,000. It's not something they have access to. So a couple recommendations on bail, and here drawing on the experience of Buncombe County during the pandemic, which was also the case for a lot of counties around the country. There were a lot of novel things that happened during the pandemic on a sort of temporary or emergency basis, and the things that went pretty well, we want to suggest that these could be made the new normal and be codified and formalized as the way to proceed going forward. So, for example, the county could codify and expand on the pretrial release practices that happened during COVID, specifically greater use of unsecured bails, and that means not having to put money up front, and using more use of warrant grace periods. So when someone fails to appear for a court date, sometimes a warrant for arrest is ordered. During the pandemic, judges were more likely to use grace periods, meaning that instead of issuing a warrant after that failure to appear, the judge would give time for the person's lawyers to try to contact the person and reschedule instead of automatic arrest. Both of these occurred during the pandemic and showed that these are relatively straightforward changes that the judges could start to implement if the judicial actors were to agree to that and establish a directive coming from the chief judge. One analysis by Buncombe County, not by Vera, in October of 2021 showed that rearrest rates for people who were on pretrial release during the pandemic period did not increase when more people were released in this way during the first 6 months of 2020 compared to 2019. So in other words, giving people more options to be released did not change the frequency with which people still showed up to court. So there was not this sort of fear of people not showing up to court did not come to be reality. So this is a positive sign for implementing this going forward. So shifting to the next topic, which is community supervision. This here refers to pretrial supervision as well as to probation and parole supervision. And all of these are pathways back into the local jail. Sometimes probation is given as an alternative to a jail or prison sentence, and sometimes it's part of the sentence, whereas parole is typically after someone has served a prison sentence. As I mentioned earlier, these violations tend to, they're a lesser portion of bookings, but people stay for longer when they're in on the violation as opposed to a pretrial charge. So the average length of stay for women booked on a pretrial supervision violation in the period we studied is 19 days, and for a probation violation is 20 days. Also, these types of violations accounted for 4 out of the top 10 charges that are driving average daily population in 2019 and 2020. So again, it's not as big a portion of overall admissions, but it's a bigger portion of people staying overnight because people are staying more nights. On an average day in 2020, 1/5 of the women in jail were held with a community supervision violation as the most serious charge on their file. And in the study that we did of the 40 women we spoke to in 2021, 43% or 17 of them were in the jail on this type of violation charge. So when we asked people about their experience of being on community supervision, how that was for them, the women again said that the hardest conditions to comply with were first, the restrictions on the kinds of housing that they need to stay in. So that might be having stable housing, being in housing that other people with criminal records are not also resident at. There's a few different variations, and also meeting drug tests. Of the people on probation, half of them also said that paying fees or debts was the most difficult condition to meet, and that drug testing was also a difficult condition. So we heard about the challenges around having to pay the fees associated with being on probation, and women talked about when they have these fees, which add up every month, it's looking at grocery bills versus probation fees. And this is a tough situation to be in. We also heard from women that sometimes the enforcement of probation conditions was quite punitive, and they felt that there wasn't a lot of credit given for having met a lot of things, and then sort of one slip up can land you back in jail pretty quickly with minor mistakes. Of course, this varies a lot by discretion of different officers and judges, but we did hear about it. So just for example, again, this is what people reported to us in September 2021. I know it's not the same across the board for all programs and all situations, but several people told us that they were paying $40 a month to be on probation. Some reported paying $80 for mandatory classes, and some reported paying $25 for some drug tests. So one person said, for example, it doesn't matter if you worked hard for 6 or 7 months. If you miss one ride, i.e. you miss your appointment, then you're done and you go back to jail. So the recommendations that we want to highlight in this topic, there's 3 of them listed here. I'll just talk about the second one in red, which is to institute a formal policy for reducing the length of time on supervision, and or for goal-based rather than time-based termination approaches. And we know that some of this involves the state law. There are statutory considerations, but there's also a role for the county to play here. So first of all, and there's research out there on this, early termination rewards compliance. So you give people a positive goal to work towards, and then they will have the benefit of having less time on probation. So this shifts the incentive structure in favor of compliance. Goal-based probation ties the end date of the probation to meeting whatever the goals are that are agreed by the court actors involved. So this, of course, requires buy-in from the judiciary as well as from the probation and pretrial supervision agencies, from prosecutors and defense attorneys, and to some extent, there are, like I said, state components involved. So this is a complex thing to implement, but it has been done in other parts of the country, and it's been shown to be effective. And given the prominence of the community supervision component in the situation of women in the jail, we would say that it's worth giving it a shot. So for example, in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, which is another SJC site, the probation, public defender, and district attorney's offices came together and did establish a policy to systematize early terminations for people who had completed half of their supervision term, met all conditions, and had no new convictions or outstanding warrants. And as of December 2019, judges had approved almost 3/4 of those early termination motions. So I will shift back to Tara for the next.
Yeah, thanks. Yep, thanks, John. So I'm going to take us through the next 3 and then get us through the closing here. So our next topic we're going to cover is substance use. Overall, we've seen that drug-related charges are increasingly common for women being booked into the jail and why they're staying longer compared to other charge groups. From January 2017 to April 2021, the percentage of bookings with a drug violation as the top charge, meaning the most serious charge, increased from 10% to 19%. When the top charge is drug related, meth possession is the most common specific charge. So recalling from the beginning some of those survey and interview stats that we had, all but 1 out of the 40 women that we spoke with had experienced substance dependency in her life. Of those 40 women, 3/4 had used meth. So women are struggling with the physical and psychological challenges related to substance use, and expecting that detox or full abstinence will fix this is not fully realistic. While the Buncombe County Jail has a well-respected medication-assisted treatment program for MAT, research shows that receiving treatment in the community is better for folks than in detention. MAT is effective for people who use opioids, but not as relevant for all other substances. Further, something else that we heard and we want to underscore here is that if you start treatment in the jail or you start it in the community and then you end up entering jail or exiting jail while treatment is happening, that continuity of care, losing that is really challenging for people. So a quote here that we want to highlight is that one woman, she says, "It feels like you have to go to jail in order to get the right services you need to get that type of help. Because if you do it and just walk in, they kind of like dangle you along and stuff like that. It feels like once you go to the hospital and try and get substance help, they'll take my phone and all my rights away from me." So this shows kind of some of that stigma there. It's the fear of going to try and get help, or going to try and get help and then ending up, being penalized for that. And, we heard that from a lot of the women. So one of the recommendations here that we want to highlight out of the 4 that we recommended is expanding access to, capacity of, and eligibility criteria for treatment in the community, especially inpatient, for low and no cost options. So this is an area or a recommendation that would likely require some funding for service providers. We would need service providers to come together, look at the needs and gaps for women here locally, especially as it relates to eligibility and accessibility. Some programs may not allow women to attend if they had previously attended and maybe relapsed or dropped out. And some programs in the community may have availability, but they might have a fee with it associated with it that's not attainable for folks. So it's important that success in these treatment programs are focused on increased stability, increased social bonds, and health rather than total abstinence from the substance. So I'm going to move on to jail conditions and costs, one of the hot topic areas. So this is one of the areas that was definitely impacted by COVID. So we want to underscore, we spoke with the women in September of 2021. And what we heard from them, a lot of it was impacted by COVID. So for example, some things like almost total isolation was a COVID protocol that the jail had in place to mitigate the spread of the virus. We realized in many ways that this was a crucial thing that had to happen, or that the jail chose to happen to mitigate the virus, but it seems insufficient attention was given to women's mental health and the effect on their mental health. So we heard from many women that the isolation, being in a cell for 23.5 hours a day, was negatively impacting well-being. In addition, for a certain time period, not in September of 2021, but for a certain period at the height of COVID, women were only allowed out of their cells for 15 to 30 minutes once every 3 days. And then with those 15 to 30 minutes, had to decide, am I going to shower? Am I going to go to commissary, get things that I need? Am I going to try and call my lawyer, try and call my loved ones? It was essentially solitary confinement, and research shows the psychological health consequences of solitary confinement, especially for people who have pre-existing mental health conditions, which, as you may recall from the opening slides, several of the women did. The cost of being in detention can also quickly add up, with various items that women have to purchase, and women in the study reported not having many or any resources to begin with. So again, this was in September of 2021, what we heard from the women. So during that time, they told us they had to spend $2 for an indigent hygiene kit, which is specifically for people who do not have funds. Women reported they had to buy menstrual products and or did not get enough free ones. Women reported paying $20 for a medical visit and then additional fees for phone calls and video calls with loved ones. Mind you, prior to the pandemic, there wasn't a fee to visit with someone in person. So that was a new cost that women had to accrue. So I'll give an update on costs in an upcoming slide, but I first want to highlight a quote. So one woman, she said, in regards to contacting family, trying to stay in touch with family given the cost. You can't afford stuff like that, but you want to talk to family. So again, this is just the hardship. You're in isolation. At that time, they were in isolation. Then they weren't able to potentially call their family if they didn't have money or the time to. So it's, we heard this a lot from a lot of the women. So, the recommendation I think that we want to highlight here is to ensure that medical visits, phone calls, video calls, virtual programming are free to incarcerated women. Implementation of this requires jail leadership to waive fees and negotiate contracts accordingly. After hearing from the women last fall, Vera spoke with the captain and the sheriff at the jail, and from that call, it was determined that the indigent hygiene kits would be eliminated. That fee would be eliminated, so it would be entirely free. According to the sheriff's office, the medical fee was waived during the height of the COVID pandemic and has since been reduced to $10. However, in September of this year, I did visit the jail, and we saw flyers on the housing unit stating the outdated medical fee of $20. Captain Luttrell and others at the jail were very quick to take that down and realize that it needed to be updated. But what I want to underscore and say here is that it's very important that accurate, cost-free things are clearly communicated to women, that they understand what they're entitled to, what is available to them, so that they can make the best decisions that they need. So, for these women that we spoke with, whether to visit medical or to get an ibuprofen, it costs $20, $10, or is free, is a huge difference for these women. And it's really important that they understand what's available to them. So the last topic area here that we're going to get into is interagency coordination and communication. The top issue that we heard in terms of information and communication from the women is that they didn't know the basics of their case or what to expect next. This left them feeling scared, powerless, uncertain, afraid. Most women didn't know when their next court hearing was, and several didn't know why they were in jail to begin with. Of the women surveyed, nearly a third said they waited more than 8 days for their first hearing after arrest. 37% said they didn't have a lawyer present at their hearing. And of those that did have their lawyer present at the video hearing, they weren't able to confer with them confidentially because of the video setup. Another big issue that we heard was interagency mix-ups or slow communications. We heard from women that they missed court dates or were given failure to appear charges because they were being held in another jail in another county, or they had recently come over to the Buncombe County Jail and were in that COVID quarantine time. So, we want to, and I'll say this a few more times, but it's just communication is so important. Like, if you can't understand or you don't know, it's hard to know what to expect, how to prepare, how to be ready for what's coming in your case. So the quote that I want to highlight here is, a lot of these people, they have their families going to those court dates to show support, And because my court date was actually supposed to be for today, my mother, she took off work and everything. My boyfriend took off work. They're all supposed to go to my court date, but it wasn't today. It was 17 days earlier. And I think this just shows, you know, making sure that the women know, their families know, people understand what's happening. It's hard, right? So the recommendation we want to highlight here is to no surprise, to ensure that women and all people held in jail receive frequent and clear communication about their cases. It's important that jail staff and attorneys work together to provide opportunities for women to easily access their lawyers and information about their cases, regardless of COVID or virus mitigation strategies. Vera recommends that officers on the housing unit proactively provide women with information about their case and also provide publicly available information upon request. So, for example, the jail is working to provide access to Buncombe's court notification system on the housing unit tablets. So with this, a woman or a person incarcerated could look up their name and see when their upcoming court date is. For people that aren't incarcerated, you can use this to see when your upcoming court date is, but also sign up for notification messages leading up to your court date, so you can be reminded. So, you know, again, it's communication. We don't doubt that some of these things were not communicated to them, but they may not have heard it. You know, coming into jail, whether you're detoxing or something's going on, you're normally in some sort of crisis, and to be able to absorb that information of why you're there, what's happening next, is hard at that time. And that ongoing and open communication is really important. So in closing, in Buncombe County, we found from our study that there is excessive use of police, jail detention, and community supervision for low-level charges that do not risk public safety. The growing incarcerated women's population here in Buncombe is reflective of a nationwide trend, but it's not inevitable or impossible to solve. Many of the recommendations in our report, if implemented, can impact the population for all people. And many of the recommendations are squarely within the purview of county leadership and local agencies. However, we also know that women have unique needs that must be addressed. And one way to improve the quality of care for women is to hold fewer women in jail and bolster services in the community so that women won't be entering, re-entering, or remaining in the system. So I'm gonna pass it over to our colleagues at UNC, and then we'll have some discussion at the end. Thank you for bearing with us. I know that was a lot of information and a lot of content, but we look forward to some questions at the end. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Williams. I'm from the Collaborative for Maternal Infant Health at UNC Chapel Hill, but I'm a resident of Buncombe County. I live here, so I'm your neighbor and have kids that go to your kids' schools and all that. But we have been, I want to,
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
oh,
Do you want to help us? So sorry. Give us one moment. Not just I know. Same with me. I'm so sorry.
all right, thanks. All right, so where was I? I want to also just thank the Buncombe County Justice folks for inviting me today to share this information with y'all. We felt like this would be a good audience for us today. So, So I want to talk with you about the Dignity for Women Who Are Incarcerated Act. It was enacted in December of 2021. So it actually was enacted after Vera did their work here in the Buncombe County Jail. So some of the things that are included in this law were not yet in place at that time. So it enhances the care provided to incarcerated pregnant people and also all women that are incarcerated. There's a few things that apply to all women. It applies to all jails and prisons in North Carolina. The full text of the Dignity Act can be found on a website that we created called incarceratedwomenshealth.org. And it can also be found a number of different places, including the North Carolina General Assembly website. So just to give you a few, I'm not sure why that jumped ahead. There's a few provisions that apply to all females. So the first of those is that to the extent practicable, male employees shall not perform inspections of undressed female incarcerated persons if a female employee is available in a reasonable amount of time. And for every place that you see an asterisk, there are some exceptions in place for like safety and security, but anytime one of those exceptions is made, there has to be documentation of the exception and it has to be provided within 5 days to either the jail administrator or the sheriff. The second thing is that sufficient menstrual products must be provided at no cost to the incarcerated person. And the third provision for all females applies just to state prisons, but it's just sort of helpful for folks to know. But in state prisons, moms of children under the age of 1 should be held within 250 miles of the child's permanent address when possible. So whatever the address is of record of that child, the mom should be within, 250 miles is still a long way, but they should be within that distance. And then there should be at least twice weekly contact visits allowed in those situations if they're in lower minimum security facilities. And so those, again, that's one of those asterisk things where there has to be documentation if that's not complied with. So the rest of the act that or the law that I'm going to go over are apply to pregnancy and postpartum. And while pregnancy is really, it's rather a small percentage of folks. I think the Vera folks found that there was one pregnant person that was in the Buncombe County Jail during the time that they did their interviews. But at any given time, about 5 to 7% of women that are in jails and prisons across the country are pregnant. So, this does happen from time to time. And so if we're looking at kind of a statewide level, there's a larger number of folks. So there's a prohibition on restraints, which applies to the second and third trimester of pregnancy through 6 weeks postpartum. So around 12 weeks through the 6 weeks postpartum. And it prohibits the use of, all the different types of restraints. And again, exceptions can be made for safety and security, but that has to be documented. And then wrist restraints can be held in front of the body during transport. So like when folks are going to appointments between facilities, those can be used at that time. But restraints are never allowed during labor or suspected labor. And so those really, there were some instances prior to this law being in place, not in this county, but elsewhere where women were coming in labor, in shackles, not being able to receive proper medical care because they weren't, quickly able to get that. So the next piece is body cavity searches are prohibited anytime during pregnancy through 6 weeks postpartum. And there's the obvious concerns about like infection and other things that can be introduced during the pregnancy that can be dangerous or harmful. And in the rare instances, again, when there's a suspicion of contraband, again, that would have to be documented. But in those cases, it would have to be a qualified medical person that's doing that exam if it's deemed necessary. There's also a provision for a bonding period after a woman delivers. So if she's in the hospital and has her baby, she should be allowed to have the baby in the room with her, barring any kind of health or safety risk. And so, it can be really helpful. Even some women don't want to have the baby with them, and that's perfectly okay too. There's no requirement, but if that's something that they want, it can be beneficial even to have, just that time. And also if they want to try to breastfeed even for a day or two, that can be helpful for baby and for mom. So the following must be provided to incarcerated people during pregnancy, again, starting from the beginning of pregnancy through the 6 weeks postpartum period. So the prenatal labor and delivery care must be provided at no cost. So the Vera folks had talked about the medical copays that exist in the jail, and there should be no copays whatsoever for any care that's provided related to pregnancy. Prenatal nutrition and supplements should also be provided at no cost. And if someone does happen to be hospitalized and they're pregnant, then they should have access to all the meals that they otherwise would, regardless of what maybe the schedule is in the prison or in the jail. And postpartum hygiene and sanitary products must be provided at no cost to the incarcerated person as well. And there's a couple of provisions around their living conditions. So the restrictive housing is prohibited at any time during pregnancy through the 6 weeks postpartum period. And you can understand how that could be really kind of difficult with COVID and all the other restrictions that they mentioned have come into play, but there should be no use of solitary for pregnant folks. And that they should be in beds that are no higher than 3 feet off the floor. So they shouldn't be expected to climb up to, like the top bunk if they're pregnant. So those are sort of the basics of the law, and just a few sort of systemic issues that I wanted to acknowledge, because a lot of times people sort of bring these things up. But there was no funding for implementation of the Dignity Act, surprise, surprise, in North Carolina. But this is not, this is something that's left to the local sheriffs and to the prison to do on their own. And there's staff shortages in all jail and prison settings, which makes some of these things more difficult to implement. Most jail health is provided through private contractors. So in most counties, they don't have healthcare provided through like the county health department. There might be some partnerships with the health department, but most of it is provided through private contractors. And so what that private contractor actually will be willing to provide is determined by whatever they contracted with the county. So what's required by the law and what's actually in a contract may or may not match. And a lot of times those folks don't have necessarily any kind of maternal child health experience. And so if they're just used to seeing adult males, which is the vast majority of folks that are in prison, if they see a pregnant person with a really elevated blood pressure, they may or may not recognize that as an emergency, because that's not something that they're used to seeing. And if it was in a male, it wouldn't necessarily be a problem. One of the issues that kind of keeps coming up for us is the use of safekeeping in pregnancy. And I feel like probably a lot of you are familiar with what that is, but in case you aren't, that's this practice of sending folks to a higher level facility like a prison if they have medical needs that aren't being met at their local jail facility. And this is used fairly regularly for pregnancy in North Carolina. I don't know in Buncombe County what the exact numbers are. I'm not really sure what happens specifically in this county, but across the state, there are folks that are sent to the state prison in Raleigh because their local jail doesn't really feel that they have the capacity to care for them during their pregnancy. And at any given time, there's between like 20 and 40 folks that are at the state prison that are pregnant. And oftentimes those folks have not actually been convicted of anything yet, but they're sent to the state prison because of their pregnancy. And sometimes it's seen as a protective thing. And so this can actually lead to, of course, greater harms, because if someone is in state prison and they're sort of just awaiting their court date, that's problematic on so many levels. And it can also delay their case resolution. It can cause separation from their family, especially for folks that are, farther out from Raleigh. And there's, it's highly likely that care could be provided somewhere in their community. As was mentioned earlier, medication for substance use disorder, so MAT, is really time sensitive. And in pregnancy, this is particularly of concern because if a woman is withdrawn while she's pregnant, it can cause harm to her and to the pregnancy. And so if there's any sort of delay in between, different facilities, or if she's arrested and she's not connected with that care right away, it can cause lots of problems. And it also increases her risk of overdose upon release. And then there's the obvious issue of separation and child welfare involvement, since the vast majority of women do have childcare responsibility. So I have two items that are really small and then after that I'm going to be done so we can have our conversation period. But because I work at the Collaborative for Maternal and Infant Health, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention just a couple of things that are broadly important to women that are in these carceral settings. And so just two of those. One of them is maternal mortality. So if you've been paying attention to news stories over the past several years, you've probably heard that we have a really high rate, disproportionately so in the United States for of maternal mortality, and we're at the highest, we have the highest rates of maternal mortality in the industrialized world, and they're much, much, much higher than a lot of our peer countries. And what's really concerning about this, and as it relates to incarceration, is that over half of those actually take place after birth. And so you know, even if someone isn't visibly pregnant, if they are in the jail setting and if they've had a baby at any time during the past year, it's really important to be kind of aware of what some of these concerning signs might be that could lead to maternal mortality, or to really, you know, maternal mortality is sort of the worst case scenario, but there's also lots of other situations that could be really dangerous to folks' health. And up to 2/3 of these deaths are preventable. And so, you know, the majority of them happen before delivery and around the delivery, but as you can see, between, you know, the 7th day and the 365th day, there's still a really large chunk of folks. And so I'm just kind of keeping in mind that any person that you see that's of reproductive age, it's quite possible that they may or may not have had a baby in the past year, and it's something that you should just sort of know as you're working with these folks. But there are some warning signs. I won't go through them one by one, but if you grabbed one of the handouts that we made that were sort of geared towards the jails, those are all listed there with nice little graphics. And there's lots more information about those on cdc.gov. There's a campaign called Hear Her, which is really aimed at this idea that we need to be paying attention and listening to women when they think that something's wrong, and that these are some of the things that are really concerning in those situations. So the last item is just to make sure that we mention that vaccination in pregnancy is really important, especially in carceral settings, and that there might be a window of opportunity to get some of these recommended vaccines if they hadn't received them, and especially if they hadn't received any prenatal care prior to being incarcerated. And those that are recommended are, of course, the COVID-19 vaccine series plus the booster. This has been tested in pregnancy. It's known to be safe. It can confer some immunity to the baby even, and so that's helpful. Tdap and the flu vaccine. So I think a lot of these are things that you all are familiar with. The one thing I wanted to mention is that one thing that we're encountering, and I don't know if you have experienced this in your work as well, but that sometimes people fall off the Medicaid rolls when they end up in jail or prison. And it's not supposed to happen as frequently, I don't think, as it does. But just something to bear in mind is that I think it's supposed to happen if they're convicted of a felony, but I think folks are losing their Medicaid at some point along the process. So just knowing that when you're working with folks, that you might need to ask that question and make sure that you're getting them reconnected with Medicaid if they found themselves incarcerated. There's also lots of home visiting programs. As you know, there are lots of substance use treatment services. And in North Carolina, we do have sort of a centralized place where you can check for bed availability for folks that are pregnant and they receive priority. So that would be the Alcohol and Drug Council of North Carolina. There's 1-800 number up there. Also, that's on the other flyer that we created. And there's also Mayhead Cara locally, which works with pregnant women on prenatal care as well as their substance use disorder. And then UNC Horizons, which sometimes can defer folks from jails. So we created a few resources. We're kind of at the beginning of this project. We got a little bit of funding to work on some things related to COVID and pregnancy, but we're kind of expanding it to the Dignity Act and resources for the jails. So we've created the handout that's also available in a poster format. We have our website that we would love for you to check out and give us feedback about. And then we have a healthcare provider training that's almost done. And our goal is to try to make sure that all the healthcare providers around the state that work with folks that are in the justice system are able to care for them adequately and know the law. And then we also have a corrections officer training module that we're working on to try to make sure folks feel equipped with this new information as well. And then just some more resources about health. Again, our website, there's the CDC website, and we have a vast amount of information around maternal warning signs and other things related to pregnancy and health. That's it. What's next?
So I think we have some time now for any comments, questions, anything that came up between either of our presentations, or I don't know, Tiffany, if you want to come up too while we. You're available. Any comments if you guys have any?
Hi, yeah. So excuse me, applicable to say prisons only, where it says incarcerated persons shall be within 250 miles to the greatest extent practicable. To my knowledge, Raleigh is still the only prison that houses pregnant women.
Pregnant women, yeah. But what that says is if they have a child that's under the age of 1, so even if, after they're no longer pregnant, they should be within.
For medium and maximum, the choices are still only Raleigh and Hampton in those cases, correct?
You all, I'm sure, know a lot more about the.
I can speak on that. My name is Duncan Kim. I'm the social worker at the Western Correctional Center for Women. So we're in a minimum custody facility. So there's only three women's facilities in the state. And the challenge is that if you have a woman coming from the eastern part of the state, and somebody is minimum custody, they didn't get transferred. Population management is moving people around. So some of it keeps people farther away. We don't see the pregnant women because central processing in Raleigh brings all the women enter there. So they get kept there and they birth their child there. And it's likely they will stay there. It's very rare that women will come there. I think maybe I have one woman right now in my caseload. Her child is 22 months old, and she's releasing soon. He's going to be going to a drug treatment program, Southlight, that will accept her and her son. But again, we don't see that many. We don't see that many women at our particular facility in this particular category. But we're set up that if they have a child under 1, we will accommodate that. We'll make that happen for the 2 visits per week. Thank you.
I have a question about the money that the incarcerated people are having to spend. Where does that money go?
So, good evening, everyone. My name is Tiffany Onicho. I'm Justice Service Director. So if you guys have questions specific to me, or if there's people in the room that can answer them, feel free to jump in. So for me, I think the question was about the money that's collected
From the inmates?
services from inmates in the jail. I would defer to our Sheriff's Office team if anyone wants to answer that for her.
Hey, everybody, I'm Jeffrey Littrell. I'm the captain of detention civil for Dr. City. How our funds get distributed is from services. It goes into what we call a detainee welfare account. So that account is used for, the detainees. So mattresses, bedding, all these items that it takes to run a facility, that's where that money comes from. We're a lot different than a lot of other counties, because in other counties, it all goes to the general fund, then just gets distributed evenly throughout the county. So we're a little bit unique in that aspect.
I can answer the one for incarcerated prison. So in the prison, there is a $5 copay for the medical visit. But it does not prevent somebody from being seen. If they cannot pay it, that's not a problem. Because usually what people will have happen is that families are putting monies into their JPay account. If there's an actual medical emergency, then actually they will not be charged the copay. And that's both for medical as well as dental services that we have.
Yeah, but then if you get money, they'll take it.
Yeah.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct.
If you get some money, they're
They will
gonna
do
take
it.
it.
Yes.
Why was Buncombe County charging for indigent?
The indigent.
Indigent, $2. That makes no sense to me. That should have never happened.
Someone can't brush their teeth if they don't have $2.
Indigent's supposed to be, they're supposed to get paper,
That should be
pen,
free. Indigent
toothbrush.
is free.
It might be Bob Barker, but it's supposed to be
I'm
free.
sorry,
At least it's
guys.
something.
I'm sorry, let me calm down.
That's not been a problem in terms of feminine hygiene process, never been a problem, even before the Dignity Act, that the women were always supplied with that. And there was never a charge for indigent supplies, and usually people who are indigent will get monthly allotments in terms of actually other things from the canteen.
I want to provide a bit of context on this too, and perhaps the staff from the jail can speak to this. Again, what we reported here was what we heard from 40 women who were in the jail last September. And I want to acknowledge that in a lot of cases, and this is normal in jails across the country, what is the policy on the books and what the COs know is the policy is not necessarily what the women understand is happening. And so my understanding is that it was always the case that menstrual products were supposed to be free, but sometimes there weren't enough or people had to buy extra at commissary. These were the kinds of things we heard. So we're not saying necessarily that the policy in place was incorrect. It sounds like it was correct. However, A, people weren't getting it implemented consistently, and B, they didn't know what they were entitled to. And they didn't know who to ask. So that was the theme. But I know that perhaps you all have an update on some of these questions since we last spoke.
Yeah, so going back to the indigent kit, the reason why we did charge for indigent kits is because it was over abuse of somebody that would come in, they claim they're indigent, and in 7 days they would get $100 put on their account by being away. So that's why that was done. That was done way long time ago. That was changed. Fee for an indigent kit, and then you can also include paper, pencil. So there's other things other than just the basic hygiene, but soap, toothpaste, all that is given to you free of charge.
So just because there's resources available at no cost, but there's also stuff in the commissary that if you don't want the products provided, you can pay for it as well.
Yeah, you have to be truly indigent to get the free products. If you come in and you got $500 on your account, you'd be expected to, purchase those items off of commissary, the soap, toothpaste, that sort of thing.
If I can just make a general comment about this issue, and again, I know that this is normal practice across the country, but something that Vera and other organizations generally suggest is that it is the state or the county's responsibility to provide for the basic needs of people who are detained either in jails or in prisons. And so, of course, it's understandable that governments that have limitations on resources would sometimes charge fees for things, particularly for people who have family giving them resources. However, our suggestion is that the county could consider reallocating its resources such that everybody in the jail or prison receives a basic level of supplies regardless of their income status, and that this could be funded by the public resources, which would eliminate the need to assess people's ability to pay. It would simplify things. People can still have the option to purchase additional things in the commissary, and it would both simplify and kind of level it off, because even if someone's family is providing money to them, they may wish to spend that on things like video calls to distant relatives rather than for basic items like menstrual products or toothpaste. So it's something to consider countywide. I know that the jail is managing a lot of challenges with resources, but this is an area that the local government and the state government can just provide a basic level for everybody across the board if they wish to.
And I'd also just like to add really quickly, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead and start.
Okay, sorry. I just want to add on the topic of menstrual products. I'm seeing the faces from our jail staff, so I just want to make sure you address it that, we heard that there were products available, but they may not have been the products that women thought were right for them or good enough or enough. So I just want to make that comment and make sure we're like covering our bases there.
Yeah, my concern is even before we even get to that point, like, have it ever been any mention of like maybe creating jobs like for peer support specialists or recovery coaches or community health workers be placed in the neighborhoods that have a better relationship with the people? Because a lot of times people go to jail just for, BS reasons. You already worked up, and then here come the police. Then normally they just contribute by just aggravate the person or disrespecting them, and now you're already mad about whatever you're going through, and then now the police try to say any little thing to take you to jail. How about having people that's already have a relationship in the community to be able to just be able to diffuse stuff like that? Because a lot of times people just want to be heard. A lot of people just want to just express how they feel. And then if you have a relationship with this person, you already know what this person going through, so you already know how to like come at them. A lot of officers don't. Have they ever been mentioned before we even got to the point of being arrested?
So I can't speak to necessarily my role, but I've heard conversations, especially around like reimagining policing, especially in Asheville and Buncombe County, of looking at co-responder models or different models for persons or behavioral health providers. And Kathleen's looking up for me. She's probably hearing a lot of this information. So I'm gonna just let you deflect to you.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I guess what I can say is there is awareness among, and sorry, my name is Captain Blackney. I work for the county doing sort of strategic planning at the intersection of behavioral health and justice. So similar to Tiffany, I can't speak directly for my role, but as somebody who sits in rooms with folks who work in the justice system, folks who work in emergency services, direct care, mental and behavioral health providers, I have heard folks talk about the importance of finding ways to not just try to bring a solution into a community, but figure out who is already doing the work in the community and how do we partner with those resources at that level. Conversation, right? But that's what I can speak to.
Yeah, that's what be my problem. It'd be a lot of conversation, but it don't be no action. You know what I'm saying? It's like with conversate with the group, and then as soon as the group disperses, you forget about it. Then it's the community still going on. So who do I talk to get you know what I'm saying, to be able to express how I feel because of my experience of my life and then my experience on being on this side of the fence too.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure there's more than one answer to that question of who to talk to, but I'd be happy to give you my contact information. And we have a group that's doing some of this planning that would be a space that community members can come and share in as well. Okay. For sure. But I'm sure there's more than one answer to that.
Okay.
I just had a question about some of the conversations. I'm trying to get clarity on the process. So at what point do women, when they're being processed, when are they told what rights they have as far as access to these products? And then is there a grievance process that's built in that they're made aware of that they can say, oh, here's who I direct my complaint to if I'm not receiving X, Y, or Z?
So everybody that is coming in as they're being processed, 24 hours in custody will be, showered out, sent to a house unit. So that's at that time where you're going to receive, and that's free of charge. You're going to receive, soap, toothpaste, that take shower. And yes, we do have a grievance procedure, place an internal grievance procedure. They can also agree to state and Department of Health and Human Services who comes in and inspect our facilities. They can agree with them as well.
I just underscore this point, just like generally speaking, the research, I know we presented a lot of numbers and quotes, but Tara and I and others at our organization did these interviews via video, and this is something that we've experienced in other places as well. This is not unique to Buncombe, but just the degree of challenges that women in jail are trying to manage with trying to mitigate what's going on in their life outside from the disruption, plus the experience of being in isolation, plus various health and substance use situations that they're going through. It's very difficult for them to integrate a lot of information. It was even difficult in some cases to kind of clarify the questions that we were asking and get clear answers. And so you can imagine that someone coming in, hearing about products that are available to them, hearing about their case, how to contact their lawyer, what's going on with their kids, where they're going to be sleeping tonight, where their property is. It's a lot. And so the general message that we want to communicate, I think, to everybody working in government and in the community is that to the extent that we can take that burden off the person who's inside and proactively provide that information through staff, through peer supports in the system, through tablet-based information, numerous times on a regular basis, not just in the initial admission, is something that would be helpful, because it's just clear that they weren't able to think of all these different components of their situation in a systematic way, which is, I think, pretty understandable.
Tara, can you share what you saw in the women's housing unit regarding menstrual products when we toured you?
Yes, I saw menstrual products.
I know you always, but.
Yeah, well, I don't know that it was like, I didn't know what brand it was, but yeah, there were menstrual products. I'm not denying that there were menstrual products on the housing unit for women to access.
I'm just wondering, are the female inmates or any inmates able to communicate outside the jail any other way than writing a letter ever? So how is that happening? They don't have money or anybody putting money on a phone card or being able to access the tablet with the email. Is there any way they're able to communicate with the outside family?
Not without money. You have to.
They have to have money to have any kind of outside communication.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Hey, I'm Erin. I'm the director at the Alcohol Drug Treatment Center in Black Mountain. So none of this is shocking. 39 out of 40 of these women had substance use disorders, which is probably pretty similar to what it is in the facilities most of the time. But, I think that we have to back up and stop criminalizing possession of drugs. And so, like, part of this is that the part where we were talking about, like, really being able to find alternatives to putting people in jail for having a substance use disorder. And honestly, like Buncombe County, I work with 37 counties in Western North Carolina, and Buncombe County is doing a great job compared to some of these other counties in terms of what they're doing with substance use disorders in the jails. I'm not saying that's perfect, but there's work going on. But I think, like, our goal has to be them not even getting to that point. And so kind of taking that step back and stop criminalizing people for a substance use disorder, stop criminalizing them for possession of a drug, really, I would say any of it. But so I think that, like, part of this is working with and making sure North Carolina actually has a pretty good, we have low and free cost treatment for people who have no funding. So my agency is able to serve anybody who has Medicaid, Medicare, or indigent. We can do inpatient treatment. Do we need more beds? Absolutely. Are we always being cut? Absolutely. Do we always, are we always on the chopping block because we don't have enough funding? Yes. And so it's kind of a greater issue around stepping back and trying to figure out how we stop putting people in jail for these things too. Yeah, and again, just to reiterate what we said in the presentation, we recognize that, state laws are a different kettle of fish that probably none of us in this room have a lot of influence over other than voting, but local practice and choices around how police and jail resources are deployed for different situations is something that you can push your local government and agency leadership on. And so just thinking about the expenses spent to hold someone in jail for several days versus the expense that could go to a treatment facility. It's a powerful argument, and it has happened in counties around the country that local counties have made different choices regardless of what state laws say.
I do compliment Buncombe County and the judges that have compassion with our jail diversion programs. That does need to be understood, that we do have a lot of resources here, and with our jail diversion programs and them allowing the inmates to come out for treatment, it is nothing short of amazing here in Buncombe County. So although we may get frustrated with the jail part, we are here to support those with active addiction and try to help them all across the county.
Is that the captain back there?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. My concern is, like, I'm just curious to know, like, what happened to the old system where when you're in jail, you can just call somebody and they decide if they want to accept the call instead of making it so tough to where you got to have money on the books. Like, I know technology can advance, but it wasn't really nothing broke with that system.
Basically, technology is advanced. That's the whole, I'm trying to Yeah.
Yeah.
That's no longer available with any vendor that I'm aware of.
Can you see mentioned the word vendor? So do you guys have phones that are?
Yeah, so our phone, we don't provide a phone. That's not paid for by the county.
Okay.
We have vendors that come in, they provide commissary services, they provide phone services, video visitation services. So those are vendors that we contract with in order to provide those services. So you've seen on one of the slides, it was, we got to communicate with those vendors to try to reduce the cost of, fees that, a detainee would have to pay in order to call somebody, visit somebody. So one thing I'll say that kind of piggyback off of what a lot of you have said is we're committed to trying to provide the best care that we can provide. But at the end of the day, we're a community of we, and I'm still in the sheriff's thunder. That's his slogan, but we're a community of we. So we're all in this together. So we all are going to be solving this problem. We need more people at the seat. I appreciate and love that everybody that's here tonight, your input. We need more people at the seat to make these changes happen. So.
Can I piggyback on that? We're looking.
Great segue.
We're looking for people who want to help kind of try to implement these recommendations for the community engagement work group. It's a paid position, $35 an hour.
But that
Only 10 hours a month. Yeah, here we go. So seriously though, we will be continuing to meet and then seeing what we can do to try to get some of these recommendations implemented. And we do, as he was saying, we need more people at the table. Tony said, folks just like to talk. And so when you come to this, let me tell you now, what's the day? You're not gonna have it fixed by Friday. So don't get upset and quit and take your ball and bat and go home because it didn't happen overnight. This ain't McDonald's, Wendy's, no drive-through. It takes time, but you have to be committed. And the county is committed by saying, listen, we appreciate you and your time. We're gonna give $35 an hour as you work on this. So if you're a community member and you're interested in being a part of that, see me before we go. We have childcare for about 7 more minutes.
How much time do we have on Q&A?
We got childcare for about 7 more minutes.
It's almost up.
If you brought a child, please do not leave your child on Thursday.
Okay, we can take 2 more questions.
I just have a quick comment to piggyback off of Brent, which is that the community engagement work group he just referenced has been talking about how to make a standing committee to see how we support our jail partners in implementing some of the suggestions or talking about improvements. So there really is a great opportunity to get involved.
There are also subcommittees.
Who has subcommittees?
And anybody who wants to tour the detention facility, so it's the county jail, Buncombe County Detention Facility, same thing. Anybody who wants to tour, we spend a lot of time and effort touring people through the facility. So get with me, Aaron Sarver, aaron.sarver@buncombecounty.org. We do tours pretty regularly. I know a lot of y'all have toured. There's a lot of Buncombe County folks, staff in here. So we can't tour everybody by Friday, but we're happy to do it. And we have our jail supervisors back here. They lead the tours. We're happy to show you, it's an open tour for you. If you want to go up to 6th East, we'll take you up to 6th East. If you want to spend 2 hours in the kitchen, we'll spend 2 hours in the kitchen. So I think that's a big part of what Sheriff Miller has stressed is letting people see inside for themselves, ask questions, nothing's off limits. So that's our
age limit?
invitation.
What's the age limit?
That's a great question. We can't let juveniles in the facility at all by state law, so it'd have to be 18 and up, I guess.
That's a need to come.
Hi, this is off the topic of the prisons, but as far as Vera's engagement with Buncombe County, it's been tremendous. Vera is actually what brought me to Buncombe County as part of the Vera Pathways post-secondary education product. Will Vera continue to partner with Buncombe County on a reentry basis, maybe furthering programs like Pathways?
You're referring to the college and prison programs? Yeah, that's another team at Vera that is managing that. So as far as I know, yes, but I can give you the contact information for that team. I know they've been expanding their work since the Pell Grants were reinstated for people in prison. So I think so, but I don't know that answer for sure.
To go back to what you said about children can't, like, well, juveniles can't be in there, could there be a way of like a video recording to where they could see the video of how it is inside?
Sure.
I mean, because they need to like, this is where you don't want to be.
Sure, 100%. And I think, I mean, it's literally like a state law. We can't have juveniles inside the facility, but we're happy to, and I think we have some of that. We can absolutely, you know, work to do video kind of tour preview stuff, you know, 100%.
Should we go to closing?
I want to thank everybody who helped to put this together. Lindsay and Hector, and if I don't say your name, you can give me them all. Hannah helped out, and who? I don't know who she's pointing at.
I know.
You are, Tiffany wants to thank you. And, also, can we put a hand together for Angela to run it out? We have our IT stuff going on here.
I do want to recognize, I see a lot of community here, but to county leadership who devoted their time, to the sheriff's office staff, even to one of our local district court judge, Judge Couples. Like, we have county leadership and court partners and community partners all really trying to make a difference. But what's most impactful is having you all here and listening to those who are working in community or have this experience and making this change in partnership. As Captain Richard said, we are a community of we. So I do appreciate you all taking the time out this evening to come and speak with us. And
another thank you by presenter.
What's your next steps of like joining the community engagement? But in case you don't have the capacity or you want to still engage but not necessarily do that, what are the kind of next steps to the work that Vera has done and the recommendations?
Well, I think it's going to go through that channel. So if you just kind of want to remain updated and posted, you can see me too. And what I can do is just kind of let you know how it's progressing. But if you really, I really would love you to be a part of that because we have slots open for community members, and we need that. We need more community members. Yes, Pauline.
How do people online sign
up? Everybody who is online and in here has my email address. Email me, Brent Bailey. Email me, brent.bailey@buncombecounty.org. Let me know you're interested, and we'll get the process started.
I also just want to say that there's some copies of the report and the fact sheet in there online. And also Vera, this isn't just kind of we drop in and leave. We're continuing to work with the county. So our emails are there. And if you have questions about like where else has someone else figured this out, or we can put together like a community fund to provide vouchers for phone calls or whatever creative ideas you all come up with. If you need support on implementation, please just send us an email. That's what we're here for. And it's great to see so much excitement and commitment to this from across the community.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, sweetheart, there's plenty of leftovers. Yeah. So, pick somebody, you know, still.
Don't come near me. Let up. I've had this thing. Oh, good.
Okay. Well, it's nice to meet you. Please do this. Like, it's not a ton of time. We don't meet a lot. We're about 10 hours long. No, I just don't want to. So basically, things like this, right? So this is information and awareness. So we're trying to bring information and awareness. So this is one thing. Something done like before COVID, community kind of hearing from people. We know some of it can't be done. So you mentioned decriminalize. That's the state legislature. Now, I mean, we can like work on that. We're gonna That's a good question. Yeah, I guess what we got
I'll email you tonight. I already know. Just add me on. And this is Joanna. No. Okay.
Like, no.
Thank you. Am I allowed?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I won't pay them no attention. You didn't do nothing.
I did. Please don't tell me.
Everybody got perspective and insight, and you get to offer.
But not.
Yeah.
I know.
Oh, no, I don't know how all that works, but
It's true that someone else